The chandeliers of Windsor glittered like frozen constellations above the ballroom, their light cascading upon silk gowns and polished metals, every surface shimmering with the grandeur of a court that mistook spectacle for stability. The air was thick with perfume and expectation, until it fractured into silence. At the center of the marble floor stood Princess Isabella of Kent, 21 years of grace and promise, her gloved hands trembling though her chin remained high. Before her, the Queen's voice, cold, deliberate, cut through the hush. The engagement to the Prince of Rheinfeld is dissolved. Political tides demand sacrifice, and sacrifice begins at home. No word of scandal, no whisper of betrayal, merely the quiet annihilation of a future. Around her, fans fluttered like startled birds, and courtiers exchanged looks that pretended to pity but reeked of relief. Isabella did not bow. Her composure, drilled into her since childhood, was armor enough. Yet beneath the calm, something inside her wilted. She had been raised to serve the monarchy, to embody England's dignity. Yet in one public decree, she was reduced to a rumor, the princess who could not keep a prince. Her fiancé, already absent on diplomatic pretense, had written no farewell. She stood alone, a portrait of restraint, while laughter resumed in cautious ripples, the orchestra resuming its waltz as though humiliation were merely another tune. When she finally withdrew, her slippers whispering against marble, she caught her reflection in a gilt mirror, flawless, beautiful, unbroken. Only her eyes betrayed her, glistening like thawing ice. That night, the palace corridors seemed longer than ever. Her maid whispered condolences. Her mother sent a brief note urging dignity, not despair. Yet dignity, Isabella realized, was the one possession her position demanded she spend most freely. Within a week, she was gone from Windsor. A royal carriage, its crest discreetly covered in snow, carried her north through an England draped in white. The journey to Yorkshire was long and mercilessly quiet. Through the frost-etched window, Isabella watched villages slip past, stone cottages, distant church spires, fields wrapped in mist. Each mile pulled her further from the polished artifice of the court and deeper into the honest chill of winter. For the first time in her life, no courtiers awaited her arrival, no trumpets declared her name. Only the sound of hooves, muffled by snow, kept rhythm with her thoughts. She remembered the Queen's parting words. In time, dear child, the nation forgets. But what did one become when one was forgotten by the nation itself? By dusk, the carriage reached Kentwood Hall, her family's ancestral estate. Its stone facade loomed beneath a mantle of snow, the windows glowing faintly with firelight. The servants greeted her with cautious warmth, unsure whether to bow to a princess or comfort a daughter. Inside, the scent of pine and hearth smoke mingled with the faint chill of neglect. The estate, much like its mistress, had not seen celebration in some time. Her mother, the Dowager Duchess, received her with a careful embrace, neither cold nor kind, simply inevitable. "It is not ruin, Isabella," she said, her pearls clicking softly as she moved. "Merely retreat. Every woman of station must learn to endure both." That night, Isabella wandered the corridors of her childhood, fingertips grazing the portraits of ancestors who had lived and died by duty. The silence pressed upon her, heavier than any crown. In the drawing room, she paused before the grand piano where her father once played. He had died years before, leaving behind debts and the affection of a nation that admired his charm more than his governance. Isabella remembered sitting beside him, her small hands learning melody and decorum in equal measure. "You must never let them see fear, little one," he had said. "They will mistake it for weakness." In the flicker of firelight, she almost smiled. "And yet, father," she whispered, "they see nothing else now." The following morning brought a letter, its seal an unfamiliar crest pressed in dark wax. Her mother's expression shifted when she read the sender's name. "It is from the Duke of Ashbourne," she said, almost thoughtfully. "He was your father's ally once, before his withdrawal from court. A widower now, I hear. He invites us to his Christmas gathering." She passed the envelope to Isabella. The parchment was heavy, the handwriting firm and unadorned. The invitation was polite, yet it carried an undertone of sincerity rare in noble correspondence, an acknowledgment, perhaps, of shared loss. Isabella read it twice. The Duke of Ashbourne. She remembered the name vaguely from her childhood, a distant figure her father had once described as too honest for politics, too proud for flattery. The invitation offered nothing beyond courtesy, yet in her mother's eyes glimmered calculation. "You must attend," the dowager said. "Absence breeds more whispers than disgrace ever could. You cannot vanish from society. It must see that you endure." Isabella hesitated. The idea of standing once more among watchful eyes, of hearing laughter tempered with pity, chilled her more than the snow outside. "And if I am not wanted?" she asked quietly. Her mother adjusted her shawl. "One is irrelevant, my dear. Visibility is survival." That night, Isabella sat before her window as the snow deepened, the world outside glowing silver beneath a pale moon. The invitation lay on her desk, the wax seal catching the faint light. Beyond the glass, frost traced fragile patterns, delicate yet unyielding. She touched the window pane, her breath fogging the surface, and murmured to her reflection, "They took my crown. They shall not take my grace." Outside, the wind shifted, scattering snowflakes like whispered promises across the fields of Kent. Within the stillness, the faintest echo of carriage wheels on distant roads reminded her that the world, however cruel, was still moving. And perhaps, somewhere in that movement, her fate had yet to turn. Ashbourne Hall rose from the Yorkshire hills like a fortress carved from winter itself, its great windows aglow against the pale horizon, its chimneys breathing soft ribbons of smoke into the frozen air. As Isabella's carriage approached through a path lined with bare oaks and glimmering snow, she felt an unease that was neither dread nor hope, but some curious blend of both. The memory of Windsor's ballroom still haunted her, yet the stillness of this northern landscape offered a strange kind of honesty. Here, there was no audience, only frost, silence, and the faint promise of renewal. Inside, the manor pulsed with life. Guests in muted finery filled its corridors. Laughter drifted between the glow of candles and the scent of evergreen garlands. Ashbourne's Christmas gathering had drawn a mixture of nobility and military men, widows wrapped in sable, and scholars who spoke softly of politics beside the hearth. Isabella, entering on her mother's arm, felt the hum of curiosity ripple through the crowd. Heads turned, smiles froze, and whispers began their inevitable flight. The fallen princess, the one who lost her crown before her wedding veil. She inclined her head in greeting, every gesture a quiet act of defiance. Then the Duke appeared. He was taller than she remembered from court, his presence marked not by grandeur, but by a calm authority that stilled conversation. His dark attire bore none of the opulent embroidery favored by courtiers, and yet there was something unassailable in the precision of his bearing. The silver pin on his cravat caught the firelight, a snowdrop carved delicately in ivory. His eyes, gray as morning mist, carried a weight of unspoken solitude. When he reached her, his bow was perfectly measured, neither patronizing nor distant. "Your Grace," she murmured. "Princess," he replied softly, his voice steady, warm at the edges. "Ashbourne is honored." "The honor is mine," she said, though her tone was careful, her words polished as glass. For a moment, silence settled between them, brief yet palpable. Then, as if to dispel it, he gestured toward the gathering. "Society has a remarkable appetite for redemption, provided it comes neatly wrapped in grace. I trust they will find you most nourishing." The remark startled her, not cruel, yet painfully precise. She met his gaze, her composure cracking into a faint smile. "Then I shall endeavor not to disappoint their hunger." He inclined his head slightly. "I doubt you ever could." That evening unfolded in the slow rhythm of polite festivity. Music floated through the grand hall, violins threading warmth into the cold. Isabella moved among the guests with a serenity that belied her vigilance, answering questions with quiet wit, accepting glances with regal poise. Yet, every so often, her eyes found the Duke across the room, observing, never intruding, his expression unreadable. When conversation failed her, she caught herself wondering what such a man might think of exile, of dignity stripped and redefined. Later, as the hour grew late, the Duke approached her again, finding her near the window overlooking the gardens. Snow was falling thickly beyond the glass, blurring the statues into ghostly silhouettes. "You prefer solitude to company," he said, not as accusation, but as understanding. "I prefer honesty," she replied, "and solitude does not lie." He smiled faintly. "Nor does it flatter. That is its greatest virtue and its cruelty." Their conversation meandered between small truths and silences that felt almost intimate. When she remarked upon the snowdrop pin, he touched it briefly. "My late wife's," he said. She believed they were proof that beauty could survive the coldest ground. Isabella's gaze softened. Then she was wise. She was dutiful, he corrected. Wisdom was rarer among us both. It was then, as laughter echoed faintly from another room, that he turned to her with a sudden candor that caught her breath. "You are wife material, princess, though not for a crown, but for a heart." The world seemed to still. For a fleeting instant, the only sound was the muffled wind beyond the glass. His words, spoken without ornament or hesitation, carried neither flirtation nor pity. They were truth, raw, unpolished, perilous. "I beg your pardon," she managed, though her pulse betrayed her calm. He looked away, almost rueful. "Forgive my frankness. I meant no impropriety." "On the contrary," she said quietly, "I think impropriety is the first honest language I have heard all evening." He laughed softly, a sound rare enough to feel like a secret. Then, bowing slightly, he left her by the window, leaving the echo of his words lingering like warmth in the cold air. The following morning brought sunlight brittle as glass and the beginnings of rumor. By breakfast, the ladies had already begun their quiet dissections. How the Duke had spoken to her twice, how he had walked beside her in the corridor after supper, how propriety trembled where sympathy began. The gossip traveled quickly, reaching even those who smiled at her with faint affection. Isabella bore it with composure, though the knowledge stung. She had endured judgment before, but this felt more dangerous, for it involved hope. That evening, the Duke organized a sleigh ride across the frozen lake, a customary amusement. When her turn came, he offered her his hand to step into the carriage. "You need not endure this chill for courtesy's sake," he said softly. "I am accustomed to colder company," she replied. His answering smile was brief but genuine. As they rode, the sleigh glided across the moonlit ice, bells chiming in measured rhythm. He spoke little, yet his silence felt companionable, as though they shared an understanding that required no words. At the ride's end, he handed her a small carved charm, ivory-shaped into a single snowdrop. "A token," he said, "for the cold days yet to come." "Is it comfort or warning?" she asked. "Whichever you need most." Rumor ripened overnight. By Christmas Eve, whispers claimed the princess sought refuge in the Duke's affection, that her exile had turned to ambition. Even the servants spoke carefully in her presence. When Isabella overheard two ladies murmuring that widowers are easily consoled, especially by fallen royalty, she felt her resolve harden. She would not become a tale told between sips of wine. As the bells tolled midnight, she began to pack her things, her decision clear. Yet before she could summon her carriage, the Duke appeared at her door, snow still clinging to his coat. His expression was grave. "You mean to leave?" he said, not as question but fact. She met his eyes. "It seems I bring winter wherever I go. Perhaps it is best I travel on." He stepped closer, the firelight flickering between them. "Or perhaps, princess, winter has merely found its match." The words hung in the still air, both a challenge and an invitation. She said nothing, but her hand stilled on the latch. Outside, the wind howled across the frozen fields, carrying with it the first hint of a storm. The storm arrived without mercy. By dawn, Ashbourne Hall was buried in silence and snow, its chimneys choked by wind, its windows veiled in frost. Roads vanished beneath white drifts, and the carriages, including Isabella's, were rendered useless. She stood at her window, watching the storm erase the landscape, as though the world itself had chosen to imprison her within the Duke's walls. Her trunk stood packed by the door, a symbol of flight denied. For a moment, she felt an unexpected mixture of relief and dread. Fate, it seemed, had chosen delay, and with it, confrontation. The hall was subdued. Guests huddled near fires, their conversation hushed, their smiles dimmed by the storm's persistence. Servants moved briskly through the corridors, their arms burdened with wood and blankets. Isabella, restless, wandered the galleries, tracing the gilt frames of ancestral portraits. The Duke's lineage watched her from the walls, faces stern, resolute, dignified. Yet even surrounded by strangers' eyes, she felt a curious absence of judgment. The quiet was companionable, the kind that asked no apology. She found him in the library. The vast chamber glowed with lamplight, its shelves towering toward shadowed ceilings, a cathedral built for thought. He stood near the hearth, a volume open in his hand but unread. His coat hung loosely from his shoulders, his hair touched with silver at the temples, and in the fire's reflection his features appeared less severe, more human. When he looked up and saw her, his expression shifted, not surprise, but something gentler, as though he had been waiting. "The storm forbids escape," he said. "Perhaps it is nature's way of insisting we finish the conversations we try to avoid." She managed a faint smile. "You give the weather far too much intention, Your Grace. Only because I have learned it is the one force in England still beyond politics." Their words held ease, yet beneath them lingered tension, a quiet current neither wished to name. She approached the hearth, drawing warmth into her chilled fingers. The firelight danced along her sleeve, and for the first time, he noticed how thin she seemed beneath the finery, how the past weeks had stripped not only her title, but her peace. "Your mother must be anxious," he said at length. "She'll fear this delay will add to the gossip." "She fears silence more than rumor," Isabella replied. "At least rumor implies one is still worth speaking of." He regarded her closely. "You speak as one accustomed to cruelty." "I speak as one accustomed to observation," she corrected softly. "Cruelty requires malice. Society rarely thinks enough to be cruel. It simply watches and records." Her candor struck him. Most women of the court would have sought pity or masked pride with defiance, but she spoke as though peeling away a truth too long buried. He set his book aside. "You do not belong to that world anymore, Princess. You see it too clearly." She turned toward him, eyes luminous in the fire's glow. And yet clarity offers no refuge. Seeing the bars of a cage does not open it. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm rattled the windows. Outside, the wind moaned through the eaves. Then he said, almost to himself, "My wife used to fear storms. She said they made her feel small against creation." Isabella hesitated. "You love her greatly?" He stared into the fire, in the way duty allows. She was kind, patient, undeserving of loneliness. Yet I suspect she knew our affection was shaped by expectation, not choice. When she died, I grieved her absence and the honesty I never gave her. Her voice softened. Perhaps honesty comes only after loss. He looked at her then, truly looked. "And what have you lost, Isabella?" "Permission," she said quietly, "to be loved without purpose." The fire cracked between them, its embers whispering in the pause that followed. He reached for the poker, stirring the flames, his movements deliberate, restrained. "If I were a wiser man," he murmured, "I would let you leave before this moment undoes me." She felt the breath catch in her throat. "And yet, you do not move." He lifted his eyes to hers, and something unguarded flickered there, an ache, an astonishment, the dangerous spark of recognition. The distance between them seemed to collapse into silence. His gloved hand twitched against the mantel, then fell open, uncertain. For a heartbeat, time faltered. A knock shattered the stillness. A servant entered, bowing low, his expression troubled. "A message from Windsor, Your Grace." It arrived by courier before the roads closed. The Duke accepted the letter, his jaw tightening as he read. His eyes flicked briefly to Isabella, then away. "It appears the Queen has taken interest in your welfare once more," he said evenly. Her stomach turned cold. "Interest?" He handed her the parchment. The seal was unmistakable. She broke it with careful fingers, reading the precise, merciless script. The Queen commanded her immediate return to Windsor once the storm cleared, citing the impropriety of continued association with the Duke of Ashbourne. The words stung not for their accusation, but for their familiarity, an old rejection, freshly polished. "So," she said, folding the letter with quiet precision, "the throne still finds use in my disgrace." The Duke's expression darkened. "This is unjust." "It is consistent," she replied, meeting his gaze. "Consistency is the monarchy's favorite virtue." He moved toward her, the anger in his voice tempered by restraint. "If they speak against you for my sake, I will answer it." "Then you would confirm their suspicion," she said, her tone calm, but her hands trembling. "Defiance from a duke is rebellion. From a princess is folly. They will destroy us both, not for love, but for defying their indifference." He stopped before her, the fire casting light across the space that separated them. "And what would you have me do?" "Nothing," she said, forcing the words past the ache in her throat. "There is dignity in silence still." He exhaled slowly, his eyes shadowed with something like despair. "Then we are both prisoners, one of duty, the other of pride." She turned toward the window, where snow still beat against the glass. "Perhaps," she whispered, "but at least this prison was honest." When she faced him again, he had stepped back, his composure restored though his eyes betrayed the fracture. "When the road's clear," he said, his voice low, "I will see you safely home." She nodded, though the thought felt like loss. As he left the room, the door closed softly behind him, sealing the silence like a wound. The storm raged on through the night. Somewhere beyond the frozen gardens, the wind carried the faint toll of distant bells, solemn, mournful, and unending. The New Year's ball arrived like a fragile promise, glittering in the pale dawn of winter's end. The Queen's cousin had spared no expense. Crystal chandeliers shone above polished parquet floors, their prisms scattering light over walls lined with gilded mirrors. The orchestra's strings sang through the great hall, a delicate thread weaving the myriad conversations into a single tapestry of sound. Isabella entered with quiet dignity, her gown a cascade of silver and white, the fabric catching the candlelight as if it were spun from frost itself. She moved with measured grace, aware of every whisper that followed her like shadowed companions, every glance that weighed her worth against expectation. The Duke of Ashbourne waited near the grand staircase, his posture impeccable, yet tension clung to him like the tail of a cloak. His gaze found hers instantly, unflinching. In that look, they exchanged a history condensed into moments. The snowbound confidences, the quiet laughter, the firelight confessions, and a truth neither could deny. Rumor had preceded them. The whispers of impropriety, of scandalous attachment between widowed nobleman and fallen princess, had swept through Windsor like wildfire. But here, in the brilliance of polished wood and crystal, neither the courtier's scrutiny nor the Queen's disapproval could conceal what had grown in silence, nurtured by understanding, patience, and the fragile courage of two hearts. The evening advanced with all the mechanical beauty of courtly ritual. Ladies curtsied, gentlemen bowed, and the music dictated steps of propriety that felt both comforting and suffocating. Isabella met every question with careful composure, yet her thoughts remained tethered to the Duke. He approached her during the first dance, bowing before extending his hand, a gesture both formal and intimate. She placed her gloved fingers in his, and the world narrowed to that single connection, a tether of certainty amid speculation. "Your Grace," she whispered, voice steady though her heart raced, "you risk much to be here in the center of all their eyes. "I risk nothing more than their opinions," he said, his tone low, intimate. "But I risk everything by waiting silently. You deserve honesty, and I will provide it, regardless of consequence." The firelight glimmered in the mirrors as they moved through the hall, a private world unfolding amid the public spectacle. Each step seemed to draw them closer to a truth that had remained unspoken for weeks. The depth of feeling neither could contain, the fragile hope that dared to bloom in winter's shadow. When the orchestra paused for a moment's breath, he led her toward the center of the ballroom. All eyes turned. Curiosity, scandal, expectation, but the Duke's attention was fixed solely on her. He knelt before her, as ceremonious as it was reckless, and spoke with the clarity of one who had measured every word against a lifetime of restraint. "Princess Isabella of Kent," he said, his voice carrying through the hush, "I offer you no crown, no title beyond the one your heart desires. I ask for your hand, your trust, and the freedom to love you, wholly and without pretense. Will you be my wife?" A collective intake of breath rippled through the assembly. The Queen's expression, rigid at first, softened imperceptibly, and Isabella felt the weight of expectation shift. It pressed against her no longer as judgment, but as witness. She saw in the Duke's eyes a steadfast sincerity, a devotion forged not by duty but by choice, and it called to a part of her heart long denied. "Yes," she said, her voice a whisper that carried like a vow. "Yes, I will." The room exhaled as one. Gasps of astonishment became murmurs of admiration. The orchestra resumed, softer now, as if honoring a union that transcended decorum. Hands clapped, some tentatively, some with genuine delight. For the first time in weeks, Isabella felt the warmth of being seen not as a pawn of politics, but as a woman capable of choosing love and claiming it with dignity. The Duke rose, lifting her hand to his lips, and the tension that had lingered between them dissolved into the faint music and the sparkle of crystal. Outside, snow began to fall again, lighter now, drifting in slow spirals past the tall, arched windows. It mirrored the quiet miracle unfolding inside. A winter that had begun with exile, shame, and expectation had softened into the possibility of happiness and renewal. Later, as the ball waned and guests departed beneath muffled carriages and lantern light, Isabella and the Duke walked together through the gardens. Snow blanketed the paths, muffling sound and softening the world. He paused beside her, drawing her gloved hand into his. "You have endured much," he said, his voice low, "and yet you stand with courage that surpasses all judgment." "And you," she replied, "have taught me that loyalty of heart matters more than the crown, more than whispers, more than fear." They walked in silence, snowflakes catching in their hair and on shoulders, each step carrying them away from the constraints of duty and into a shared future. When they reached the gate, the first hints of spring glimmered at the horizon, fragile and promising. By winter's end, Isabella of Kent was no longer a princess defined by loss. She was the Duchess of Ashbourne, a woman who had chosen love and been chosen in return, whose heart had survived the harshest frost and now flourished. England would speak of her story for years, not as a tale of disgrace, but as a legend of quiet courage, steadfast devotion, and a winter that yielded to the warmth of passion. The snow that had once seemed cold and unyielding now lay as a testament. Even in the harshest season, love could take root and bloom.